Clive, welcome to 3am Conversations, and thank you very much for coming in to join us.
I can't keep awake until 3 a.m. You do know that.
I do know that, but we'll do our best. There's plenty of coffee. Plenty of coffee. We'll do our best, don't worry. You've given us 3 fascinating 3am conversations, which we'll come to shortly. I suspect nobody who listens to this will need an introduction, but let's put a little bit into context. You were born in Radcliffe at Bury?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the formative years.
I would think of myself as a Lancastrian because Manchester and Liverpool were very much a part of the Red Rose County as I was growing up. Much as I loved my football, I went to a rugby school.
Kirkham Grammar, was it?
Kirkham Grammar School, yeah. And half the England team were in the Lancashire team then. Yeah. The Lancashire County cricket team was just explosive. Yeah. I went to probably 2 or 3 Gillette finals at Lords. My family were into cricket. So I was very much a child of Lancashire, grew up in Bury and then went to school at Kirkham. I had family who had hotels in Morecambe. My favourite relations, my grandparents lived kind of just on the fringe of the Lake District, Carnforth. So yeah, old Lancashire is I'm a Red Rose boy.
Yeah. I mean, just reading your autobiography, it's clear, obviously, to the sports journalism and commentary was a passion from an early age. Was that always your dream to get into it?
Yeah, I wasn't the only kid that kicked a football around the back garden commentating to himself, but I meant it, and I was never going to be good enough to kick a football for anybody that mattered. So it was the next best thing. I was at a boarding school, really as a result of my parents' divorce when I was about 11. And in a boarding house, actually, at a grammar school. So there were probably only 8 or 9 of us in each year in that house. And so inevitably you lived in an older boys' world, music, habits. And I think probably you had to find a way of surviving in that environment. And I have never been in a fight in my life. If I found myself in a corner, I had to talk my way out of it. And that's probably where my formative education as a communicator, as a broadcaster came.
Yeah. You sort of transitioned, didn't you, through radio to start with? And we'll come on to Radio Trent in a minute, and then into television. How did you find that transition? Was it a deliberate transition? Was TV always the end game, or how did that come about?
I think so. I think that you have to have a certain amount of vanity and ego to want to be a public performer of any kind, and that ego feeds you onto the biggest stage if you can reach it. The great rock guitarists don't dream of playing at the local Palais. They dream of playing whatever, Wembley Stadium or Madison Square Garden. So, and I suppose, I had ambition. I think radio was more prevalent then. Every football match wasn't broadcast on television. So actually, you as an Everton fan, you as a Liverpool fan, if your team was playing away from home in Europe, that was your only way of following the game, to listen to it on local or national radio. The biggest difference is you're not as important in television, and you've got to get that ego around that, or if you want to be a good television broadcaster, it's a visual medium. You are just the soundtrack to the movie, and I mean there are some great movie soundtracks, but nobody goes to a cinema to listen to the soundtrack. They go to watch the movie, and the soundtrack can probably only really get in the way of a movie. I often say that good commentary is Italian music in an Italian restaurant. If you walked into a Japanese restaurant and they were playing Italian music, you go crazy. The two just don't go. You are only augmenting what people are already experiencing. They can turn you down, they can turn you off, and still enjoy the football match. So as a television commentator, you've got to accept that you're not as important. Radio is more fun. Radio, you just go in and plug in and a red light comes on and you go. And I think a lot of it comes from the heart. I think television commentary is much more of a test of concentration. It's good television commentary is thoughtful. It's done with the head.
Well, let's move on to your three conversations, because we're going to come back, I think, to the differences between 2026 and 1975 on one or two questions, I suspect. But the first conversation you gave us is intriguing. I think there's a double header in it, but we'll see where we go with it. And that's when you talk about, your words, the call I got at my student house in May 1975, offering me a runner job at a new commercial radio station in Nottingham, which was Radio Trent. Having read your autobiography, this probably came as a welcome development, because you'd done a deal with your dad, hadn't you?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was a small businessman, quite successful. I would say that my mum and dad were the generation of our family that, I hate the pigeonholes, but kind of moved us from working class to lower middle class. He was a salesman. He had the gift of the gab. And I guess they wanted me to have a good education. And good education, boy, is still a huge dividing line between the haves and have-nots in the modern world, not least the modern UK. But I got that good education from them. And with that came an expectation that I would go on to university, and at university prepare myself for a career in the professions, because those professions were what we all looked up to. And in business, he saw me probably becoming an accountant or working in marketing, something of that nature. And I wanted to be a football commentator. And I think it was only for the fact that in 1972, when I was applying for university courses, there were probably 3 or 4 journalism courses in the entire UK post-school education network. There are now 3 or 4 in every university. I didn't get an offer from any of them. So I did a degree in industrial economics with politics. And that was readying me really for the kind of career path that my dad and my mum had very carefully and very devotedly put me on. And it was only the first break is the biggest break, is the reason I want to talk about this particular juncture in my life. If I hadn't been graduating from the University of Nottingham at a exact time that a commercial radio station was opening up in Nottingham, and they were taking on a lot of staff, including runners, people with no experience. If I had knocked on the door of that radio station quite as aggressively as I did in the weeks leading up to my finals, and indeed the radio station coming up on air, but that perfect storm was what got me where I wanted to be. And as I say, once the door was open to me, and I'll never forget the guy, Bob Snyder, who the first man to show faith in my love of broadcast. He couldn't show any faith in my ability to broadcast because it wasn't proven, but he could see how much I wanted to work for him and for Radio Trent. And he recognised that, and he gave me a chance. And that phone call came actually about 2 weeks before I took my finals, which wasn't a huge motive. I always insist the reason I got a 2-2 rather than 2-1 was that I was in celebratory mode by then. I actually asked him in the phone call when he offered me. I'd been knocking on the door and going down to the radio station when they had been building the studios and making a real nuisance of myself. And he came on. He was a Canadian, and he had a wry sense of humour. And he said, "Look, I've got to tell you, you've got to stop coming down here. There are all kinds of safety issues. That's it. We're finished. I don't want to see you again." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I feel bad about it." He said, "In fact, I feel so bad that I'm going to give you a job." And I said, "What?" I said, "What degree do I need?" He said, "You don't need a degree. You're only making tea." So, yeah, under those circumstances, I got into the radio station. As it happened, I was multitasking, doing everything. The guy that had been employed to come from what was then Radio the start of Radio 1, the sounds of the 70s as it was launched. He was down to do the late night rock show, which was aimed at the student population, really, 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. And he got cold feet just before the station went on air, and they needed somebody to play rock music to the students, and I actually got a gig straight away as we came on air. I did the late night rock show for five nights a week.
Wow, yeah. I mean, you hinted that you felt you might have benefited from being a sort of white, sort of lower middle class kid with a decent education. Would you have considered yourself privileged in that respect when you look back?
Oh, it's difficult to reflect on that now because, I just feel lucky. I've not had any major crises really. I mean, I've had a divorce. I lost. We'll probably talk about the ITV job but I mean, in the context of health and wealth and just general happiness, doing the career, being involved in the two careers really, broadcasting and football. Having that combination, even through the most difficult or scary, probably a lot of it I brought myself. Times in my sort of personal life as a young man, the consolation was always the work, and I just loved my work from day one. And as I say, there's nothing like love. There is nothing like love. For falling in love with somebody or something is the greatest thing that human beings can do. And I was already in love with the idea of broadcasting, and when somebody indulged me and made it more than an idea, actually made it a profession, I loved it even more, and I still do.
I'm going to pick up on Matt's word privilege and an incident that actually is probably the antithesis of love. So bear with me, because I've followed your career, Liverpool fan. You've uttered some of the iconic sentences or phrases. Hello, remember the name, all of that sort of stuff. But the one reading your autobiography that really struck me, and I don't think I saw the game, was England-Bulgaria 2018, and Bulgarian ultras abusing the England team, black players in the England team. And on your monitor and on the screen comes a picture of Raheem Sterling, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And your phrase was, I wonder what's going through that young man's mind. And then you say,
I will never know.
That's fantastic. Line,
I suppose in a way, people say, oh, come on, what's your best favourite commentary line and all that. So Anne Solskjaer has won it. I mean, if you wanted a serious answer, it would probably be that. I think probably, how long ago would it be that I first met Troy Townsend, father of Andros Townsend, and an absolute pillar of Kick It Out and football's fight against racism for, I would probably think, 3 decades. And I've probably known him for 2 of those. And one of my arguments to him when I first got involved with Kick It Out is, I said, I know your enemy. A lot of people that I knew, maybe through my privilege, didn't think they were racist, probably wouldn't never have regarded themselves as racist, but actually were, just with their behaviour and their conversation and their attitude towards racism, were perpetuating a lot of the, a lot of the, they're not even, the misconceptions really, but misunderstandings, a lot of it. It's my dad was a lovely man, and in his later years he'd sit in front of the TV and I'd go around and visit him in his little flat. And I remember Monty Panesar had a really golden summer for England. A spin bowler, for those of you who don't know, a spin bowler who wore a turban from an Asian background. And I remember going into my dad's sort of room one day, and he said, "This Pakistani who plays for us is good, isn't he? He's really good." I said, "What, Monty?" He said, yeah, he's really, really good. I said, "He's from Luton, Dad." He said, No, the guy with the turban. I said, "Yeah, he's from Luton. Most of the others in the team are Australian or South African. I think you'll find. But he's actually English." And my dad still played a bit of golf. And the next time I saw him, he said, "I told them down at the golf club, he's English." Now, it's a story that you'd almost hesitate to tell now, But they were the barriers that needed breaking down. This whole thing about, but can they do it on a cold Tuesday night at Grimsby? Well, that was cast aside by a whole series of black centre-backs kicking lumps off white players on a cold Tuesday night at Grimsby. Of course they could do it, but we just needed to see it with our own eyes. And so when I first got involved with Kick It Out, I said to Troy, you need white men like me. I think I can reach people better than Rio Ferdinand and Jason Roberts, who were very active around the organisation at the time, fell out with the organisation in the end. And that was probably my message. And I think it's a recurring message with a lot of causes today, that the way that you address your own privilege is by looking very, very hard at the man in the mirror, asking yourself whether some things that you find funny really shouldn't find funny, because that actually is probably the biggest giveaway, the jokes that we find ourselves laughing at. And then you can start to address them, address your own attitude towards those things, correct yourself, and then I think you're probably in a better position to go on and correct some of the misconceptions that people around you have about the way the world works. We are at a really, really critical time now for migration. Migration is a huge problem for the world for all kinds of, and it's a really real logistical problem. It really, really is. But the attitudes towards migration and actually convincing people in our country that immigration is really, really good for the way that our country works is not something that my business does very, very well, because we tend to try to give equal time to people with polar views. And actually, I'm not sure that's always good journalism. I think it's part of our responsibility to reflect what we believe to be fair and right and proper. And I'm not sure that we are delivering those messages as a platform well enough at the moment, which is a bit of a stray from where you started me. But I do think it applies in football too. And I think the moment I often had this sort of, I sometimes will stop a meeting and say, how many black players were in the last England football team? And you immediately start to see the whole room going, well, it was no, the answer is not 5 or 6 or 7. The answer is it doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter anymore. Once upon a time when sort of Viv Anderson and these guys and John Barnes were, really having to live with the most awful kind of abuse because they were different. They were the pioneers that enable us to say now that nobody's counting anymore. And that was the difference between Bulgaria as a nation and England at that time. In Bulgaria, they were still counting. These were the first black people a lot of these guys had ever seen in their lives. And they reacted to it. If you can break down those barriers, and there are people brave enough to put themselves out there to do it, then you will get great black footballers, you will get great female football commentators, and so on. You will get a great gay footballer playing for England openly one day and scoring a goal in a major championship final. And we all know that diversity is good. We all know that a room full of different views is best for stimulating creativity and arriving at the right kind of solutions. But I don't like what I call Noah's Ark diversity. Well, we'll have one of them and one of them and one of them. Yeah. And then the conversation becomes stilted because it's being carried out with the jeopardy of somebody saying something which might end their career any moment now. And I'm not quite sure how we return to a more open microphone.
Just resilience and experience are something that are key, and we hear that mentioned a lot, that resilience word. And I just wonder, you've got it throughout your career, you've had various sort of various moments, and I wonder how the sort of formative years and dealing with the likes of Brian Clough, Bill Shankly, those sort of people, if you can deal with those sorts of people, that must stand you in good stead. You look at the younger generation as they are at the moment, it's very different. They're probably not used to criticism, they're not used to challenge. you've had some really different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, again, without sounding 150 years old, we were taught respect. And that isn't necessarily a good thing, because it actually gave license for Brian Clough to bully me. And he was a bully. Now, he was a bully who had an alcohol problem, and that is not, me telling tales out of school. That's the only fight that he could never win in his life. And he was a brilliant, brilliant man. He was very, very good to me. All of the time that I spent around him during those 2 years in Nottingham were electric. I never quite knew what he was going to say next. I might wait 3-4 days outside his office for an interview, but when I got it, A, not only was it great copy, but B, my interview with him for Radio Trent would make some kind of national impact, which actually promoted me too. So he was very instrumental in getting my name out there, because I had his trust. I covered Forest home and away at a time when the relationship between football and its media was very different to what it is today. So I have huge positives from my experiences with Brian Clough, but I had to take a few on the chin along the way, where he just did ridiculous things to make a point and really bully me out of his sight. But I was accepting of that. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, discuss.
Well, let's move us from Nottingham to Liverpool.
Yeah,
Merseyside.
Why not?
I
should be sitting between you, really, trying to kick you
that's
apart.
all right. We're
a red and a blue.
We can cope with this. He understands where he stands in life. Don't worry about it.
Look at the league table.
No comments.
Show us your medals.
Indeed. When it comes to football, I can see he's got far more medals than I have, but never mind. You once said of Merseyside, well, you said in your autobiography, if you want to open your mouth for a living, there's no harder school than Merseyside. And there's no better place to learn. And your second conversation sort of emanates from Liverpool and your time at Radio City. And again, as you put it to us, the conversations around prejudging the causes of Hillsborough. As you listened to the radio that day, driving back from where you were, Villa Park, the other semi-final. And you described that as a great confessional.
Yeah, huge lesson in life.
Put it in context. Tell us.
So we are in the 1980s. Football hooliganism is rife. I went to the 1985 Champions League European Cup final to commentate on a football match in Brussels, and finished up counting dead bodies seeing dead bodies for the first time in my life and having to count them. The Heysel Stadium disaster. I was at the other semi-final, you say, which Everton won. In 1989 at Villa Park, and driving up the M6 back home, I'm hearing of the tragedy. Well, the tragedy started to unfold, obviously, live on air, to the point where it was reported, the first reports of death, which were kind of just before half-time at Villa Park. Phil Easton, the late Phil Easton, handed back to me to continue to commentate on the Everton game, and I actually said live on air, no, this isn't important anymore. And they had a bit of a discussion at half time and kind of dealt with it, and we did commentate on the second half of the Everton game in actual fact, but my first reaction was that. So it wasn't that I didn't understand the gravity of the situation, but of course the original narrative, which was already starting to be fed to media by 5:30 and 6 o'clock. Brian Clough, funnily enough, was fueling it. Yeah. Not funnily at all, but he was fueling it. I just thought I'd seen that this is Heysel all over again. Yep. They've broken the gates down and gone in and crushed their own. That's what I thought. Yep. When I got home in pre-mobile phone days, back to Wirral, there was a phone call from one of our very best friends, was my boss at the radio station. I want you in tomorrow morning. We're going to do a phone in at 8 o'clock, and I want you to front it. And I said, no. I said, I've seen this film before. I'm not the person you want. I wasn't there. I'm not going to say the right things. Tony, you need to find somebody else. I'm not doing it. He said, well, you are doing it. You're in. So I was in at 7:30 the next morning, the old Radio City studios in Stanley Street. I can see the moment now that I'm walking up some steep steps into the reception area, and there was a guy I'd never seen in my life before. I don't think I've ever seen him since. And he had a football ticket in his hand. And back in the day, entrance to a football stadium was via a perforated piece of paper. And as you went through the turnstile, that was torn down the perforation. You kept half of it as a kind of receipt, but that was your ticket into the match. And he had his ticket completely whole. And the first words he said to me were, "They just opened the gates, Clive. They just opened the gates." And we did the phone in, which was 2 hours that morning. And about half an hour into it, the Taylor report had been written, because everybody was phoning in with the same story. And either they'd all been in a pub in Huyton the night before and, got their story straight, or they were telling the truth. That word. And I start to fill up the moment I see Margaret Aspinall's face right in front of me. The truth. That's what it became. It became a fight for the truth. Fucking 30 fucking years before anybody would accept what happened. And fortunately, I did that phone in. And within half an hour, all of my preconceptions about what had happened and had been fueled by my own experience, by the experiences of football hooliganism during that period of time. Yeah, I stood corrected there and then on the spot. I realised that this was not Heysel. This was human tragedy. This was lambs to the slaughter. And I became part of it was not a campaign, just the fight to make people realise that this was different. This is completely different, and all of football's got to realise how different this is. And I think that, those 90 odd lives that were lost. There is no consolation for that. There is no legacy really for that. But it I think has enabled an awful lot of people to learn the same lesson that it took me 12 hours to learn over the course of those 30 years. And I know you've had a lot of involvement with, some of the real victims of this. And what they have been through in order to get this story out. It truly, there have been a couple of wonderful dramas on the subject. But let me give you the subject of another drama. About 4 days, I think it was like the Wednesday, we were all gathering as a media pack in the old car park, the players' car park outside the main entrance of Anfield, which is not there anymore. And we were there waiting for statements, and obviously by now the pitch had become this extraordinary floral tribute to the people who'd been to a football match and not come home. And I got this message that Kenny wanted to see me, King Kenny, player manager of Liverpool at the time, who was, in the same book you're talking about, there's a chapter on Kenny which I start by saying the most childish sense of humour of any adult human being I've ever met, and he became the most adult human being in the 2-3 weeks after. He and Marino attended just about every funeral, I think, and the statesmanship and his leadership, not as a footballer man, but as a human being, to this day is a huge part of that. So I was summoned into the inner sanctum, and Kenny was waiting for me in reception, and by then he was already pale and drawn. Boy, Hillsborough hurt him. The change in that man over the course of the next couple of years, he carried a lot of weight for a long time. And he just said to me, I thought, what have I done? And he said, Ian Whelan? And I said, what? And he said, Ian Whelan? He said, a young guy who wanted to be a commentator. You'd shown him around Radio City a couple of times. And I thought, yeah. He said his family want to meet you. And I'm still, pennies slowly dropping through the slots. And in the players' lounge, the old players' lounge at Anfield, there was the most extraordinary scene, because these young 24, 25, 26-year-old athletes who, I'd played golf with, got drunk with, my mates, were counselling bereaved families. They had no training, they had no idea, but these families wanted to meet the heroes of their loved ones that hadn't come back. and Ian Whelan, who was 16, went to the game that day and didn't come home. And Wilfred Torres, his mum and dad, wanted to meet me. Ronnie Whelan was inevitably his hero, and Ronnie and Elaine was sat there listening to them, and I'd sat down with them, and I meant a lot to Ian, and they wanted to tell me. His sister Kerry, they wanted to tell me, and wow, I'm not prepared for any of this, and that was just. You just learn so much about yourself and your priorities, and what's important in the world and what's not important in the world.
Very wise counsel. Let's move on. Conversation 3. And this centres on your departure from ITV in 2022. After many years.
Yeah, 2020 was when they told me I was no longer the senior commentator.
And then you left subsequently. So again, put it in context for us.
Well, I took over from the late great Brian Moore as ITV senior commentator after the World Cup final of 1998, which was his retirement game. Sadly, he didn't live for long after that. What a wonderful, wonderful man. I didn't probably realise what a wonderful man until I was sitting in a cold Kent church listening to the tributes to him at his funeral. It was the most wonderful time, and ITV put so much faith in me and gave me really the career that we're talking about. I owe so much to people that believed in me at ITV, including the guy that took the decision to get rid of me. During the COVID summer of 2020, we'd had our matches allocated for the European finals of that summer. Gareth Southgate was the England manager. Gareth was at our wedding. Gareth is a really close friend. The chance to commentate on England at a home tournament with a chance of winning the damn thing, and my mate in charge, was something I was really looking forward to. COVID took that away from me. Fine. Then towards the end of that summer, my contract was up. I was summoned to a Zoom call. I thought, it would be about what do we do next, and they told me that they were replacing me as senior commentator. It wasn't a particularly long phone call. I was taken aback. In fairness to them, when they'd given me the previous contract 2 years earlier, they'd said, we're aware of your age and this might be the last time and all that sort of thing. And I took that as a kind of motivation really to prove them wrong. And I think over the course of the 2 years, I'd done a pretty good job, and there had been no controversies my start was fairly high at the time within the business. But they took the decision. I think two things really. One, it was a mistake to keep me on as number 2. I've got to be careful here because my head might not get through that door the way I'm starting to talk here now. But I think number 2, they probably, by replacing me, made me more popular than I really was. I think suddenly I was being compared to my successor. I did 2 more tournaments where I was working for the same channel on essentially the same product. I don't think that was helpful to him. I happen to think Sam Matterface is a really good commentator. He'd certainly be in my top 10 TV commentators and football commentators in this country. So I think there are a lot worse who get more work than he does. So it's nothing personal with him. It's fine. And by the way, this lucky so-and-so you're looking at managed to sort of resurrect his career, and I'm just signed a new 2-year contract with CBS to cover the Champions League for them, for network in America. In 12 months' time, they take over the UK rights to the Champions League. So who knows? You might have to bloody well listen to me again one day soon. But it did work out fine. They were well within their rights to do what they did. My contract was up. They decided to replace me with a younger person, a different kind of commentator. I think it would have been more difficult for me to take if they sort of replaced me with somebody very similar to me in style and approach to the job, but they didn't. But they kept me on. They gave me some more employment, 2 more tournaments and a few FA Cup ties and things. Yeah, I, on balance, have got an awful lot to be grateful to ITV for. What are we learning here? How much I love the job. I think that's. I don't like to use the word hurt because, you know, I was never suicidal. I was never tearful. I was never. But suddenly somebody who actually you've got a high regard for is saying, I think we found somebody better to do this job than you. That's kind of, it's not easy to do that in a Zoom call anyway. And the Zoom call was because of the circumstances, because we couldn't meet in person. Not sure that the meeting would have lasted much longer even if it had. Probably the lessons on that side of the conversation are, how do you deal with this? How you've made your decision, which you're entitled to do. What you certainly don't do is 10 days later email me with a statement which the press office want me to give a tick to, which says I'm standing down from the role. I only had one fiery conversation on the phone with the person that took the decision, and it was after that. No, you've got rid of me. Live with it.
Own it.
Yeah, own it. I'm not doing that. And I believe that Sue Barker had something similar. I think Martin Tyler got something similar. That's obviously a corporate technique that's out there. No, I wasn't having that. And then, from my point of view, I had this really strange conversation with the producer of Soccer Aid, which I'd done from the beginning, and I'd always done for nothing. It's fine. I had some great times around Soccer Aid. My wife and family, the after parties, some of the people that we met and stuff, it was worth doing for nothing. It was great. And of course, it was for a great cause for UNICEF. So I was, if you like, the voice of Soccer Aid. And Soccer Aid was produced by an independent company for ITV. And the producer, I just felt he should, I was kind of asked not to say anything, but there were certain people that I felt needed to know. And he was calling me about Soccer Aid, which was in the, 5-6 weeks time. And I said, look, you need to know this. Between you and I've been replaced. I would think they will want Sam Matterface to commentate on Soccer Aid. And he said to me, well, I don't care. He said, it's an independent production company. We want you. So you're doing it. I said, it meant so much to me at the time. And then 20 minutes later, he called me back. And it's the biggest, if my head is too big to get through the door, it's his fault. It's the biggest veiled compliment I've ever been paid. He said, I need to know something. I need to know 2 things. He said, you've not done anything, have you? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, this is a children's charity. He said, is there something I should know? And I said, no, I've not done anything. And he said, are you okay? And I said, yeah. He said, you're not dying. I said, no, I'm not dying. And actually what he was saying was, I can't work out why they've done this. There must be a reason for it. And so I then, with my wife's counsel, and she runs her own PR company, I just felt that if that was the perception out there, that I must have either done something or I must be ill, I need to use social media to make a public statement to say, and I did say, look, what the decision they've taken, I don't agree with it, I don't understand it, but it's fine. It's absolute. They're more than entitled to replace me. My contract's up, and that's okay. I just want you all to know 2 things. 1, I'm fine, and 2, I haven't done anything. And that went viral. And I think it was perceived by, I had some people that I really liked and trusted, some wise voices in the industry who said to me, you've made a mistake there. And maybe I didn't couch it in the right terms because it was seen as a fight back. It was seen as me lashing out at the people that take the decision. And I guess it was in it to a degree. But I was trying to make the point that, yeah, I'm still on the planet and I ain't going to prison or anything. So whether I got that right or wrong, and whether that affected my employability or not. I don't know whether, I think there was a door open there, perhaps, again, very big-headed, maybe for Sky or somebody to say, well, wait a minute, he's really, really experienced and he seems to be fairly popular given the difficulty of being popular in the business that we're in. But nobody did, apart from TalkSport, for whom I did a year before I got a bit uncomfortable with the association with gambling, and CBS, and Rangers Television. I did a year for Rangers Television, a great year, an invincible year. That kept me employed, and then I started to work for CBS on the Champions League, and somehow with a little bit of extra ITV work that I think it was probably misguided keeping me on, to be honest. But I should be grateful for that. And I managed to come through it with just a few angry nights, and in a weird sort of way, I think they probably still made me more popular than I really was. I think in a very perverse way, it's actually, I don't know. I've got he's an acquaintance rather than a close friend, but somebody that I really, really like and respect, Dara O'Brien, and he said to me, "You've been very fortunate to read your obituaries without even dying," and I try to see the funny side of it now. I don't quite know what I can pass on to anybody watching. That is a lesson from it, because I got lucky, and I was particularly lucky in that I had a great support network around me, people that I loved and people that loved me. So it wasn't something that I had to deal with alone. I still had reasonable income and a good standard of living, so there were no proper hardships, and so I don't really like to talk about in those terms or the hurt or anything. It's all relative. I mean, people suffering real hurt. It's like what's a tragedy or disaster? It's not a goalkeeper throwing one in. It's not a commentator losing his job. Nobody marched on Parliament. The world kept on turning, and football continued to be played.
Did they ever give you a reason?
Well, I certainly didn't see one at the time, because the call, the famous Zoom call, only lasted about 45 seconds. When they told me who was replacing me, that was kind of the end of the conversation. And then I had this flying round with him on the phone, probably, 10 days later, when he tried to get me to sign up to this. And he just said, we needed to refresh. Well, I don't want to hone in on that, because he was probably up against a bit of a wall and he just came out with that. So I don't want to make that a headline, but I like to think that I refreshed every day that I did the job, and still do. I'm whatever I have or haven't been, I've never been complacent. I've never had a clause in any of my contracts which guaranteed me any particular match. It's quite common now in broadcast contracts. You get the World Cup final, you get this, that. I've never had that. I've always been open for selection. I've always hoped and believed that if I did the job well enough, then that's it. I think there are certain parallels for us as commentators with footballers, because we are a matter of opinion and we are open for selection. And sometimes somebody comes along and decides that somebody's better in that role than you. And you've got to take it on the chin, and it's much, much easier to take it on the chin when you're healthy, you're happy, you're surrounded by love, and you come out smelling the roses on the other side with some more employment.
Time's against us. We're going to have to move on a bit, I think. But before we go, the last line of this autobiography we've talked about a couple of times says, "I'm not finished yet." You talked about CBS. What's next? Because you don't look like a man who's giving up yet. Well,
I've now got a little. What CBS has given me is a continued income. I'm very well paid to do what I do, but I'm not I'm not a wealthy man who could or wants to retire. So I want to do the job, but it's given me an income which has enabled me to do one or two other things around I would never ever claim to be trying to give something back. I don't want to give anything back. Sorry, I'm not that good a person. But what happens with meeting Margaret Aspinall, which the job gives you the privilege to meet a lot of people that you would never otherwise meet, and puts you in circumstances. The year that I did for Talk Sport, for which I'm supremely grateful to them, lovely people, very successful organisation. It was just me that got slightly uncomfortable with the gambling sponsorship. I understand it as a business model for them. There's nothing illegal about it. I did it more as a reputational thing rather than as a moral crusade. I thought, this is tomorrow's nicotine. This isn't a good look for me to be promoting gambling. I'm not a gambler. I don't really know it. Well, I know it now, because when I did step down, a couple of the gambling charities got in touch and said thank you. And I said, if there's anything I can do, and they said, yes, there's plenty you can do. And I've now had an education. I've met bereaved families. I've met recovering addicts and so on. So areas like that, it's just given me a little bit more time and perhaps a little bit more motivation to step off the treadmill and look at one or two other things besides. If there's anything at all that I can do to use my spare time to try to alleviate some of those pressures on the people that need helping the most, then that's what I'm going to do. And that's not a do-gooder. That's just me trying to be that human being that I just love human spirit and humankind. And we talked about it with Hillsborough and how it was shown then. I just want to see so much more of that in the world if possible, and anything I can do to promote that. That's how I use my spare time.
More power to your elbow, sir. Time's way gone.
Cool.
Thank you so much for coming in. Thanks
you.
for your honesty, transparency. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good.
You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Clive.
much indeed.